China. I mean, that is a growing economic power.
Well, they are. I mean, the great dragon from the east. I mean, is just a burgeoning power. I mean, you take, China and India together. They have half the world's population, and China, of course, is basically keeping us afloat. With buying all the debt that we're racking up in our country, which is another whole issue. But it raises the question, with people, where is China? Even if China were not referenced in any way, and obviously they're not referenced, the word China is not in the Bible. I do think there's a couple places we can see them. But even if they weren't mentioned, we would believe they have to be involved some way. I mean, just by virtue of their population, and the power that they have. When we read the scriptures, though, there's a couple places in the book of Revelation that people have seen, a reference maybe to China and the end times of these nations of the East. One of the places is in Revelation 9. And Revelation 9, with the opening of the blowing of the sixth trumpet judgment, talks about an army there of 200 million. There's some angels that are bound there at the Euphrates. Evidently, these are fallen angels, and says they're appointed, for the day and the hour, and the month when this is going to take place. And they're going to be unleashed and dry up the Euphrates, the Bible says. But this army of 200 million that's mentioned there, where these angels are bound, is been seen in two different ways. Some people see the army of 200 million as a reference to a human army, because they relate that to Revelation 16, which talks about, the Euphrates being dried up, preparing the way for the kings of the east.
Right.
So a lot of people parallel those two things, and they'll say, well, here's these kings of the east that come from east of the Euphrates. It clearly could be a reference to China, which I take it probably is. They're at least included in that.
Well, how many countries?
A lot of people parallel that with Revelation 9 and this 200 million army.
Right. How many countries would be able to put out a 200 million man strong army?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they're the only ones really that could. In fact, if you look at the newest CIA information, that's about the size of the army they could put together right now. It's fascinating. It's 199 million something or other, and that was a few years ago, and it's growing by 10% a year. So it's over 200 million. And now that's a fascinating thing, that just even John using that number 200 million, because a lot of people believe that was probably about the population of the world at the time John wrote the book of Revelation. So 95 AD, you got about 200 million people in the world. It talks about this army. Now the question is, in Revelation 9, is that army there of 200 million, though, a human army, or is it a satanic army? And my view is, I take it that it's an unleashing of a demonic army on the world, the 200 million army, because when you read about it there, it talks about them being, sulfur and brimstone and all that, coming out of their mouths, and there were these horses that are there, these satanic or like a heavenly cavalry. Now, what some people say is, well, that's just describing modern warfare, though.
Yeah, I would think, a little bit like the technology. That's
that John didn't know about. Also, it's describing tanks and helicopters, and that could be. But the fact to me that the fifth trumpet judgment, right before it, is also demonic. It refers to these beings coming up out of the abyss, which the only beings in the abyss we know of are demons. Right. They come up out, and the sky's blackened. They come and hurt people for 5 months. And then the fact that the next trumpet is this army of 200 million that kills a third of the people on the earth. You think about that. I mean, that's incredible. Wow. So it could be human or demonic. My view is it's a demonic army that God unleashes. Either way, though, that's a pretty amazing prophecy. If it's a 200 million human army or if it's a 200 million demonic army that's unleashed on the earth, either way, it's amazing. But in Revelation 16, when it talks about at Armageddon, the armies are coming together there in the nation of Israel, it says the Euphrates is dried up to make the way for the kings of the east. I take it that is a reference to China. So, whether you correlate the Revelation 16 kings of the east with the 200 million, some do, I don't. But clearly it's an army, the kings of the east, coming in here in Revelation 16. And I think China will be part of that great, army that will come in at the end of the tribulation for Armageddon. So I would find China mentioned there, at least in Revelation 16, verse 12.
Mark, what do you think is absolutely critical for people to know in these times?
Well, I think, one of the things that people need to understand, I think, is just have a basic framework in their own mind of, you know, what the future holds prophetically. You know, I think a lot of Christians, it's sad, they don't know anything about prophecy. You know, they don't even have a basic understanding of what God has unfolded for us. So, you know, I think one of the things that people need to understand, you know, what's going on in our world today, you know, with Israel, with Europe, with Gog and Magog, you know, Russia, you know, and Iran and those nations. They need to understand globalism. You know, I mean, Bible talks about a one world government in the future, a one world economy. I mean, you know, that doesn't take any wild imagination to see that today.
Right.
You know, these different signs. We need to understand these things, but then we also need to have an idea of, you know, the rapture. What is the rapture? You know, what's going to happen? You know, are things going to get better, or are things going to get worse? You know, there's this tribulation that's coming. There's an Antichrist figure who's coming. There's a second coming, you know, when Jesus is going to come back to the earth, literally, physically, you know, bodily, and fulfill the promise that was given when he ascended to heaven. There's going to be a millennial kingdom after that. Christ is going to reign on the earth. He's going to fulfill God's purposes for man on the earth. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth in eternity. So I think, you know, people need to just understand a little bit of where we're headed. I mean, I think what a lot of that does, it just gives you perspective. Right. You know, in life, you know, we're so short-sighted. We're living for today. We're worried about the stock market. We're worried about this or that. You know, and it's okay to think about the things of this life. Obviously, we have to do that. But part of the reason God's given us prophecy is to give us an eternal perspective, right, to give us a long-range view of things, and to understand what really matters ultimately in life, and to realize how short and brief and temporal the things here in this life really are. So those are some of the things. But, I mean, just to look around today, and you know, a lot of these things that are going on, people are interested in them. We can talk with people about these things, and you know, be educated enough about them and informed enough to be able to be a blessing to people that are around us, who are really, a lot of them who are really afraid, right, and really uneasy.
Well, yeah, your neighbors are asking questions, and there's nothing wrong with becoming a little more eternally minded. No,
that's right. And you know, people are wondering about 2012. You know, they're hearing about that. You know, this movie, and I think as we get closer to that date, there's going to be a lot more going on with that, with 2012, because you know the Mayan calendar, you know, predicts the world's going to end on December 21st of 2012. That's out there. You know, the whole issue of, you know, and I think if a lot of weird stuff starts happening in 2012, which it could, I mean, I don't think it's going to be related to that. I don't think that whole Mayan prophecy thing is not true. But if a lot of stuff starts happening, there's going to be a lot of people buy into that, and we need to be prepared to be able to, you know, help people who are around us, and you know, be a source of comfort for them and assurance and hope.
Yeah. Well, what a way to confuse people when you get a little bit of the truth. And, you know, they're interpreting some of these signs and, you know, coming up with a new theology or a new philosophy that is just taking the believers off the wrong track. And I wanted to ask you about that specifically, about how biblical the whole idea of 2012 is.
Well, you know, it's all based on the primary focus. It's based on the Mayan calendar. Mm-hmm. You know, the Mayans have bunch of calendars. I mean, the Mayans were amazing people in that sense. They were barbaric, bloodthirsty. Probably many of their leaders demonized people if you read what they did. Mm-hmm. But they had incredible knowledge about the heavens, and about time and about mathematics, calendars. You know, they had a long count calendar that tracks time for 26,000 years, and you know, within that are these smaller segments of time, these 5,125-year segments, and the final one of those ends on December 21st, 2012. That's when the Mayan calendar ends. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have surmised from that, well, that's going to be the end of the world, you know, that's what they meant by that. And, you know, there are a lot of problems. That, first of all, the Mayans, while they knew a lot about time, they didn't know the future. You know, only God knows the future. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we should put any stock in that. But people are looking to the Mayans, are looking to Nostradamus, they're looking to Bible codes, all kinds of things, and they're trying to find a lot of this, all correlating together, pointing to 2012, you know, as the end of the world. But I think it's important for us as believers. You know, a lot of Christians will say, well, it's just a bunch of bunk. You know, I don't need to worry about that. Well, people are asking about it, though. And I don't think we need to all be an expert at it, but we need to know enough about it, I think, to where we can, you know, help people and be informed about it enough to where we can show them why that's wrong and point them to the truth. You know, we need to bend the curve of a lot of these things that are out there, of these errors, and use those to point people to the truth. It was the same thing with Da Vinci Code.
Right.
You know, we don't have to be an expert in Da Vinci Code and all that, but to know enough about what the Bible says so that we can use those questions people have as an opportunity to bend that and say, look, here's the truth. Here's what the Bible says.
Here it is. I mean, this is the call on Christians, is that if you're not in the Word and you're not knowing the real, you're going to be persuaded by the unreal.
That's right. And, you know, a lot of people are calling this 2012 thing the new Y2K, you know, the real Y2K, you know,
Right.
that was just a warm-up, you know, for this whole deal. The other thing about this whole 2012 phenomenon is it's very new age. Mm-hmm. I've got about 20, 30 books in here I bought and used as for my research, and it's very steeped in new age. Really, this whole 2012 phenomenon, I call it the new age eschatology.
Wow.
I mean, the new age has come up now with their own eschatology. By the way, one of the big features of this whole 2012 theology is the founder of all of it, a guy named Jose Arguelles. Mm-hmm. He says one of these days that they're going to come, big silver ships are going to come and take away the people who don't believe this stuff. The people who weren't spiritually enlightened enough are going to get taken away in silver ships. Well, I've often wondered, you know, one of these days the believers are going to get taken away from this world.
Right. Well,
it's not going to be in silver ships, but right. That could be one of the ways they explain the rapture.
Right, exactly. Well, again, that's the deal. That's Satan again, taking a little bit of the truth, twisting it, like you said, bending the truth, and giving people just a little bit of a concept that they want to chew on, because as long as God's not involved and there's not final judgment involved, then there's no accountability. I can live however I want to live.
That's right. I mean, Satan has come, and really the whole 2012 theology basically is, or the 2012 eschatology is really, it's a twisting and a counterfeit of the true, because, you know, we believe there's a time of trouble coming, the tribulation. You know, they would say, well, this time of great judgment's coming. You know, they believe after that it's going to be a time of great renewal and renovation, and there's going to be a new age of enlightenment. Well, we believe there's going to be a millennium. Mm-hmm. But Satan, though, his version of all that is without Christ. Right. It's Christless.
Yes.
And ours is all focused on the person of Christ.